A mom started to let the dog sleep with the baby, just to help her newborn finally rest through the night. But 1 month later, she realized something shocking. At first, the dog's late-night pacing and whining seemed harmless, even sweet, until the baby started waking up gasping, and the dog wouldn't stop clawing at the floor near his crib. Everyone told her she was overreacting, just another tired mom losing sleep. But the truth was darker than anyone imagined. The dog wasn't being protective. She was warning her about something inside that house, something invisible, deadly, and closer than she thought. Now this mother has one night to decide if her instincts are right, or if she's about to lose everything she loves. What was the dog really trying to tell her? And will she uncover the truth before it's too late? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The winter wind howled through downtown Cheyenne, whipping snow into stinging clouds that danced under the yellow glow of streetlights. Inside Pete's all-night diner, Delaney Holt wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that evening, her movements automatic after months of the same routine. The clock above the coffee maker showed 11:30, and her feet ached in her worn sneakers. "Heading out soon, Del?" asked Pete, the elderly owner, as he counted the register. His wire-rimmed glasses had slipped down his nose again. "Just need to take out the trash and mop the back," Delaney replied, tucking a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Her braid was coming undone again, like everything else in her life seemed to be doing lately. The thought of her baby boy Tucker, sleeping at Mrs. Martinez's apartment next door to hers, made her chest tight with longing. These night shifts were killing her, but they paid better than day work. And better pay meant she could maybe start saving for a car, stop depending on the unreliable city bus to get her to and from work in this brutal Wyoming weather. Delaney grabbed the heavy trash bags and pushed open the back door with her hip, bracing herself against the blast of cold air. The security light flickered weakly over the dumpster area, casting strange shadows on the snow-covered ground. As she heaved the bags into the dumpster, a movement caught her eye. There, huddled against the brick wall, was a large dog. Its golden-gray coat was dusted with snow, and it watched her with intelligent amber eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. The dog didn't bark or growl. It just observed her with an almost human-like awareness that made Delaney pause. "Hey there," she said softly, keeping her movements slow and careful. "You must be freezing out here." The dog's tail gave a slight wag, but it stayed put. Delaney noticed it had no collar, and despite its size, there was something gentle about its demeanor that tugged at her heart. She thought of Tucker, warm and safe inside, and couldn't bear the thought of leaving this creature out in the bitter cold. "Hold on," she told the dog, hurrying back inside. She grabbed her half-eaten turkey sandwich from her locker and returned to find the dog hadn't moved an inch. "Here you go," she offered, unwrapping the sandwich and placing it on the ground. The dog approached carefully, took the food with surprising delicacy, and ate slowly, not like a starving stray at all. Up close, Delaney could see the dog was female and, while thin, appeared well-muscled and clean despite having no obvious owner. "You're not your average stray, are you?" Delaney murmured, watching as the dog finished the sandwich and looked up at her expectantly. Those eyes seemed to hold such wisdom and patience. The responsible thing would be to call animal control, but something made Delaney hesitate. She thought of her tiny apartment, barely big enough for her and Tucker. She thought of her strict budget, already stretched thin. She thought of all the reasons this was a bad idea. But then the dog stepped closer and gently pressed her head against Delaney's leg, and all those practical concerns seemed to fade away. "Pete!" she called out, sticking her head back inside. You know anyone missing a dog? Haven't heard of any, he replied, looking up from his paperwork. Why? Found one out back. Think I might take her home, at least for tonight. It's too cold to leave her out here. Pete's weathered face creased with concern. You sure about that, Dell? With the baby and all? Delaney wasn't sure, not at all. But watching the dog wait patiently by the door, something told her this was right. I'll be careful. Keep them separated until I know she's safe around Tucker. After finishing her closing duties in record time, Delaney found herself walking home through the snowy night with her new companion padding silently beside her. The dog stayed close, matching her pace perfectly, requiring no leash or commands to follow. I should probably give you a name, Delaney mused as they walked. Looking at the dog's tawny coat, she thought of the maple syrup bottles she'd refilled during her shift. How about Maple? The dog's ears perked up, and her tail wagged gently, as if approving the choice. The 3-block walk to her apartment building seemed shorter with company. Delaney's mind raced with all the things she'd need. Dog food, a bowl, maybe a bed. More expenses she couldn't really afford? But watching Maple climb the stairs beside her with such quiet dignity, she couldn't bring herself to regret her impulsive decision. Mrs. Martinez answered her knock right away, Tucker cradled in her arms. The elderly woman's eyebrows shot up at the sight of Maple. Dios mío, where did this one come from? She was freezing behind the diner, Delaney explained, taking Tucker from her neighbor's arms. Her heart melted as her son's sleepy blue eyes blinked open, his pale curls tousled from sleep. I couldn't leave her out there. Maple sat perfectly still, watching the baby with obvious interest, but maintaining a respectful distance. Mrs. Martinez studied the dog with narrowed eyes before breaking into a smile. She has good eyes, this one, gentle eyes. She patted Delaney's arm. But be careful, mijija. You make sure she's safe with the bebe? Inside her apartment, Delaney laid Tucker in his second-hand crib and turned to face Maple, who had settled onto the threadbare rug as if she'd always belonged there. The dog's presence somehow made the small space feel less empty, less lonely. Okay, Delaney said firmly. Ground rules. No getting near the baby unless I say it's okay. No jumping on furniture. And this is totally temporary until we figure out where you came from. Maple's steady gaze seemed to say she understood perfectly. That first night, Delaney barely slept, keeping one ear tuned for any sound of trouble. But Maple remained exactly where she'd settled, moving only once to investigate when Tucker fussed briefly before falling back asleep. The next few days fell into a cautious routine. Delaney would feed Tucker his morning bottle while Maple watched from her spot on the rug. She'd take the dog out for quick walks between caring for Tucker and trying to catch snippets of sleep before her evening shift. Mrs. Martinez, who had initially been wary, now greeted Maple warmly when she came to watch Tucker. But Delaney kept the dog and baby separated by a baby gate, not quite ready to trust completely. She noticed how Maple would sometimes stare intently at Tucker's crib or paw at the gate, whining softly. It made her nervous, even though the dog had shown no aggression. The exhaustion was getting worse. Between the night shifts, caring for Tucker, and now having a dog to look after, Delaney felt stretched impossibly thin. She caught herself dozing off while folding laundry, dark circles growing deeper under her eyes. One afternoon, as she sat on her second-hand couch trying to make sense of her monthly budget, the numbers swam before her tired eyes. Tucker was napping, and Maple lay nearby, her presence oddly comforting. Delaney felt her eyes growing heavy, the weight of her constant fatigue pulling her under. Just 5 minutes, she mumbled, letting her head rest against the couch cushion. Just 5. She dreamed of falling snow and amber eyes watching over her, of warm fur and gentle breaths. When she jerked awake, the room was darker, and panic seized her chest as she realized she'd slept longer than intended. But there was Tucker, still sleeping peacefully in his crib, and Maple hadn't moved from her vigilant position. The dog's calm demeanor seemed to say, "It's okay. I was watching over things." Delaney sat on the floor beside Maple, letting her fingers sink into the dog's soft fur. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't quite sure what she was thanking her for. That night, as the snow fell outside her window and Tucker's soft breathing filled the quiet apartment, Delaney realized something had shifted. The crushing loneliness that had been her constant companion since Tucker's birth felt a little lighter. In just a few days, this mysterious dog had brought an unexpected peace to their tiny home. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Maple was more than just a stray. The way she moved, her quiet intelligence, her gentle awareness of Tucker, it all hinted at something special. But for now, Delaney was just grateful for the warmth of another living being sharing their space, helping to keep the cold Wyoming night at bay. She looked at her small family, her beautiful baby boy, and this unexpected guardian who had wandered into their lives, and felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. The night crept in slowly, bringing with it the familiar struggle that made Delaney's heart sink. Tucker, usually such a peaceful baby, was crying inconsolably. She had tried everything, feeding, changing, rocking, singing, but nothing seemed to soothe him. Outside her apartment window, the Wyoming wind whistled through the gaps, adding its mournful song to Tucker's cries. "Please, sweetheart," Delaney whispered, bouncing him gently. "Mama needs you to sleep." Her arms ached from holding him, and her night shift at the diner loomed just hours away. The exhaustion pressed against her temples like a vice. Maple watched from her spot behind the baby gate, her amber eyes following their movement. The dog's tail thumped softly against the floor, and she whined, pawing at the gate that kept her from the nursery area. Tucker's cries suddenly hitched as he heard Maple's whine. His tear-streaked face turned toward the sound, and his sobs quieted to hiccups. Delaney noticed the change immediately, her tired mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "You want Maple, buddy?" she asked softly, watching as Tucker's eyes fixed on the dog. The moment she spoke Maple's name, his little face brightened, and he made a grabbing motion toward the gate. Delaney bit her lip, conflict warring inside her. She had been so adamant about keeping Maple separated from Tucker during sleep times. It was the responsible thing to do, wasn't it? But as another hour ticked by and Tucker continued to fuss whenever she tried to put him down, her resolve began to crack. "Okay," she finally whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Okay, just this once." She walked to the gate and unlatched it, her heart thumping with anxiety as Maple padded silently into the nursery area. To her amazement, Maple didn't rush toward the crib or jump up. Instead, she calmly walked to the corner of the room and lay down, her head on her paws, those intelligent eyes fixed on Tucker. The baby immediately settled, his little body relaxing in Delaney's arms. "Well, I'll be," Delaney breathed, hardly daring to believe it. She slowly lowered Tucker into his crib, expecting him to start crying again at any moment. But he just yawned, his eyelids growing heavy as he kept his gaze on Maple. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, both Tucker and Delaney slept through until morning. When Delaney's alarm went off, she shot up in panic, certain something must be wrong. Tucker never slept that long without waking. She rushed to the nursery, only to find Tucker still peacefully sleeping and Maple in the exact same spot, maintaining her quiet vigil. "You're something else, aren't you?" Delaney whispered to the dog, who thumped her tail once in response. After that night, Maple became a permanent fixture in the nursery. Delaney's worry gradually eased as she watched how carefully the dog behaved around Tucker. There was something almost professional about the way Maple conducted herself, like she had experience with babies, though Delaney knew that was an odd thought. But 3 nights later, something changed. Delaney was folding laundry when she heard Maple whining. Not her usual soft sounds, but something more urgent. She hurried to the nursery to find Maple standing by Tucker's crib, pawing at the blanket that had slipped up around his chest. "Hey, no," Delaney said firmly, moving to stop her. But before she could reach them, Maple had already managed to pull the blanket down to Tucker's waist. The dog then sat back, staring at Delaney with what almost looked like satisfaction. Delaney checked Tucker, but he was fine, sleeping peacefully, breathing normally. Still, something about Maple's behavior nagged at her. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, typing quickly. Day 10 with Maple. Strange behavior by crib. Pulled blanket down, acting anxious? Over the next few days, Maple's odd behavior continued. She would suddenly stop whatever she was doing and rush to Tucker's crib, sniffing intently around the mattress and the surrounding air. Sometimes she would paw at the blanket again, or stand with her ears perked, staring at something Delaney couldn't see. Each incident went into Delaney's phone notes. Day 12, Maple sniffing around crib again. Seems agitated? Day 13, more blanket pulling, whining louder than usual. Day 14, woke up to find Maple pacing by crib, Tucker sleeping fine but dog won't settle. During the day, Maple was her usual calm self, playing gently with Tucker on his blanket and keeping a respectful distance during feeding times. But at night, particularly in the early morning hours, her behavior grew increasingly peculiar. Delaney found herself spending more time watching Maple than sleeping, trying to understand what the dog might be sensing. Was there a mouse in the walls? A draft she couldn't feel? Or was it something else entirely? One particularly restless night, as Maple performed her now familiar ritual of sniffing and pawing, Delaney sat cross-legged on the floor beside her. "What is it, girl?" she whispered, running her hand along Maple's back. "What are you trying to tell me?" Maple turned to look at her, and something in those amber eyes made Delaney's skin prickle. There was an intelligence there, an urgency she couldn't dismiss. The dog whined softly and pawed at the blanket again, then looked back at Delaney as if willing her to understand. A knot of unease began to form in Delaney's stomach. She'd heard stories about animals sensing things humans couldn't. Natural disasters, illness, danger. But surely that wasn't what was happening here. Was it? She added another note to her phone. Day 15. Can't shake feeling Maple knows something I don't. Mother's intuition or sleep deprivation? As she stared at the words on her screen, Tucker sighed in his sleep, and Maple immediately turned her attention back to the crib. The dog's body was tense, alert, like she was on guard duty. Delaney remembered how Mrs. Martinez had commented on Maple's eyes that first day. "Good eyes," she'd said. Gentle eyes. But there was nothing gentle about the way Maple watched over Tucker now. This was the gaze of a sentinel, a protector who had spotted something concerning and wouldn't rest until it was addressed. Delaney reached for her phone again, fingers hovering over the keyboard. After a moment's hesitation, she typed, "Need to figure out what Maple is trying to tell us. Something doesn't feel right." She looked at her sleeping son, then at the vigilant dog beside his crib, and felt the knot in her stomach tighten. Something was definitely not right, and somehow Maple knew exactly what it was. The question was, would Delaney figure it out before it was too late? The pediatrician's waiting room buzzed with the usual morning chaos: crying babies, tired parents, and the tinny sound of cartoons playing on the mounted television. Delaney sat in a worn blue chair, Tucker bundled against her chest, while she scrolled through the growing list of notes on her phone about Maple's strange behavior. "Tucker Holt?" A nurse in purple scrubs called out, smiling as Delaney gathered their things. The examination room was bright with morning sun, its walls decorated with cheerful animal drawings. Dr. Klein entered a few minutes later, his salt and pepper mustache twitching as he smiled. "How's our little man doing today?" "Growing like a weed," Delaney replied, managing a tired smile. She watched as the doctor checked Tucker's reflexes, heart and lungs with practiced efficiency. "Perfect weight gain," Dr. Klein noted, making marks on his chart. "Hitting all his milestones right on schedule." Delaney cleared her throat. "Actually, Dr. Klein, there's something I wanted to ask about." She shifted Tucker in her arms, her fingers unconsciously tightening around him. "We recently took in a stray dog. She's very gentle with Tucker, but she's been acting strange at night, especially around his crib." Dr. Klein's pen paused, mid-note. "Strange how?" "She keeps pawing at his blankets, whining, sniffing the air around his crib." Delaney pulled out her phone. "I've been keeping track. It happens almost every night now, always between 2 and 4 in the morning." The doctor's expression softened into what Delaney recognized as his dealing with an anxious mother look. "Mrs. Holt." "Miss," she corrected automatically. "Miss Holt," he continued smoothly, "new mothers often see patterns where there aren't any. It's perfectly normal. Your brain is wired right now to be hyper-vigilant, to spot any possible threat to your baby." "But it's not just in my head," Delaney insisted. "Maple, that's the dog. She's trying to tell me something. I can feel it." Dr. Klein leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Animals can be sensitive to changes in their environment. Your dog is probably just adjusting to having a baby in the house. Nothing to worry about." He smiled reassuringly. "Focus on getting enough rest. That's what you and Tucker need most right now." Delaney wanted to argue further, but years of being dismissed as a young, single mother had taught her when to save her breath. She nodded, gathering Tucker's things, while Dr. Klein wrote out his final notes. Across town, in a sleek high-rise office, Brennan Straub was having a very different kind of morning. He sat behind his mahogany desk, scanning through social media posts on his tablet. It had become a habit lately, checking up on Delaney's life through mutual friends' photos and updates. Not out of care or concern, but rather a nagging worry about how her choices might reflect on him. His perfectly manicured finger stopped on a recent photo. It showed Delaney at the diner where she worked, and there, clear as day, was a large mixed-breed dog sitting beside her. Brennan's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about Delaney taking in some stray, but seeing proof made his blood pressure rise. That dog was around his son, his heir. The thought of some mongrel with unknown history near the baby was unacceptable. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Janet, get me Richard Morton's office. Yes, my attorney." While waiting for the call, Brennan stood and walked to the window, looking out over downtown Cheyenne. He'd worked hard to build his reputation in this town, to make the Straub name synonymous with success and respectability. He couldn't allow Delaney's poor judgment to jeopardize that. "Richard Morton's office. Connecting now." Janet's voice crackled through the speaker. "Richard," Brennan said smoothly when his attorney picked up. "I need you to look into something. It seems Miss Holt has brought a stray dog into her home, around our son." "Interesting," Morton replied, and Brennan could hear papers shuffling. "That could certainly factor into a custody case. Any documentation on the animal's history? Vaccination records?" "Knowing Delaney, I doubt it." Brennan's lip curled. "I want you to contact Child Protective Services. Frame it as concern for Tucker's well-being, exposure to an unknown animal, possible health risks." "I'll draft something today," Morton assured him. "It's good timing, actually. These kinds of cases often see movement before the holidays. Judges don't like the idea of babies in potentially unsafe situations during winter." After ending the call, Brennan returned to his desk, satisfaction settling over him like a well-tailored suit. He'd been looking for a way to assert more control over the situation with Tucker. Delaney's weakness for strays had just handed him the perfect opportunity. 3 days later, Delaney was just finishing her morning coffee when a knock at the door made her jump. Maple, who had been dozing near Tucker's playmat, lifted her head alertly. On her doorstep stood a woman in a charcoal gray pantsuit, holding a leather portfolio. "Miss Delaney Holt? I'm Sandra Walsh from Child Protective Services. We've received a report concerning your son's living conditions that requires investigation." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Delaney's hand gripped the doorframe as she processed the words. "I'm sorry. What report?" "May I come in?" Sandra asked, her tone professional but not unkind. "We need to discuss some concerns about potential health and safety risks to your child, specifically regarding an unregistered animal in the home." Maple had moved to stand beside Delaney, her presence steady and warm against Delaney's leg. In that moment, Delaney knew exactly who had filed the report. Only one person would be cruel enough to use her rescue of Maple as a weapon against her. "Of course," Delaney managed to say, stepping back to let the social worker in. As she closed the door, she caught sight of her reflection in the entry mirror. Pale, scared, but standing straight. She wouldn't let Brennan win. She couldn't. Sandra was already making notes, her eyes scanning the apartment. "I'll need to see all areas where the child spends time, and documentation for the dog. Vaccinations, licensing, veterinary records." Delaney's heart sank. She had been meaning to get all that sorted out, but between work and Tucker's needs, she hadn't found the time. Now that delay might cost her everything. "I can explain," she started, but Sandra held up a hand. "Miss Holt, I understand this is difficult, but you must understand, our priority is ensuring Tucker's safety. Having an unvetted stray animal around an infant raises serious concerns." As if sensing she was being discussed, Maple sat down precisely between Tucker and the social worker, her posture alert but non-threatening. There was something almost dignified about the way she carried herself, as if she understood the gravity of the situation. Delaney felt tears threatening but forced them back. She wouldn't cry. She would fight. "What do I need to do?" Sandra opened her portfolio. "I'm leaving you with a notice of investigation. You'll need to provide proper documentation for the dog within 72 hours, or the animal will need to be removed from the home. We'll also be conducting a full home assessment and reviewing your fitness as Tucker's primary caregiver." The words, "fitness as Tucker's primary caregiver," hit Delaney like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Maple anymore. This was Brennan making his move to take Tucker away from her. After Sandra left, Delaney sank to the floor beside Tucker's play mat. Her son reached for her with a happy gurgle, completely unaware of how their world was crumbling. Maple moved closer, resting her head gently on Delaney's knee. "What are we going to do?" Delaney whispered, running her fingers through Maple's soft fur. The dog looked up at her with those knowing amber eyes, and despite everything, Delaney felt a flutter of determination. She wouldn't let Brennan use her act of kindness as a weapon. She wouldn't let him turn Maple, who had brought such comfort and security to their little family, into a reason to tear them apart. Sandra Walsh moved through the small apartment with methodical precision, her pen scratching against her notepad. The sound made Delaney's skin crawl. Every mark felt like another strike against her, another reason she might lose Tucker. The social worker paused near the window, where a thin crack spiderwebbed across the bottom corner. "How long has this been damaged?" she asked, running her finger along the flaw. "The landlord knows about it," Delaney said quickly. "It happened during the last storm. He's supposed to fix it next week." She didn't mention that she'd been asking for repairs for over a month. Sandra made another note. "And the dog hair?" She gestured to the golden-gray fur that clung to the edge of the carpet despite Delaney's daily vacuuming. "This could trigger allergies or respiratory issues in an infant." Maple sat quietly in the corner, watching. She hadn't made a sound since the social worker arrived, as if she understood the need to be on her best behavior. "I clean every day," Delaney said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I vacuum, I dust, I keep everything as clean as possible while working and caring for Tucker." Sandra's eyes swept the cramped living space, the fold-out couch where Delaney slept, the small kitchen with its ancient appliances, the narrow hallway leading to Tucker's tiny nursery. Everything was neat, but nothing could hide the obvious poverty. "Miss Holt, the size of this apartment is concerning. According to our guidelines, infants should have adequate space for proper development. And with an large dog added to the equation..." "Maple doesn't take up much space," Delaney interrupted, then immediately regretted her defensive tone. "She's very well behaved. She helps with Tucker, actually. She..." "Helps?" Sandra's eyebrows rose. "You leave the dog alone with the baby?" "No, I mean, yes, but only when I'm right there. She's gentle. She watches over him." Another note. Delaney wanted to grab the pad and tear it to pieces. "Miss Holt, I understand you're trying to provide a good home, but good intentions aren't enough. We need to see concrete evidence that this environment is safe and appropriate for a child." Sandra pulled out more forms. "I'll need those veterinary records by Friday. Also, proof of your work schedule, childcare arrangements, and financial stability." Humiliation burned in Delaney's chest. Everything she'd done, every sacrifice she'd made to keep Tucker safe and cared for, was being picked apart and found wanting. But beneath the shame, anger began to simmer. "I won't give up Maple," she said quietly but firmly. "She's part of our family now." Sandra's expression softened slightly. "No one's asking you to give up your pet. We just need to ensure proper documentation and safety measures are in place." But Delaney heard the unspoken message. "If you want to keep your son, the dog might have to go." After the social worker left, Delaney spent hours deep cleaning the apartment, trying to erase any trace of inadequacy. Tucker napped in his crib, while Maple watched from the nursery doorway, her amber eyes following Delaney's frantic movements. As evening settled in, the temperature dropped. The old heating system groaned to life, pushing warm air through the vents. Almost immediately, Maple's behavior changed. She trotted into Tucker's room and began sniffing intently around the floor vent near his crib. Her nose pressed against the metal grate, and a low whine built in her throat. "Maple, hush," Delaney whispered, not wanting to wake Tucker. But the dog ignored her, scratching at the vent cover with increasing urgency. Tucker stirred, letting out a small cough in his sleep. Then another. Delaney's maternal instincts flared. She lifted him from the crib, checking his temperature with the back of her hand. He felt normal, but his cough worried her. Maple wouldn't leave the vent alone. Each time the heater cycled on, she grew more agitated, pawing at the grate and whining. The behavior was so unlike her usual calm demeanor that Delaney couldn't ignore it. "What is it, girl? What's wrong?" she asked, kneeling beside the dog. She couldn't see or smell anything unusual, but Maple's distress was real. The next day, after her shift at the diner, Delaney stopped at the hardware store. Her last $20 bought a basic carbon monoxide detector, the cheapest model they had. She installed it that evening, following the simple instructions with trembling fingers. For a few hours, nothing happened. Tucker had another coughing spell when the heat came on, and Maple resumed her vigil by the vent. Delaney was almost asleep on the couch when she heard it, a sharp electronic chirp from the detector. She sat up, heart pounding. But before she could reach the device, it fell silent. She waited, watching the small green light blink. No more chirps came. Just a false alarm, she told herself, exhaustion pulling at her like quicksand. It's fine. Everything's fine. But Maple didn't seem to agree. The dog paced between the vent and Tucker's crib, her anxiety a silent siren in the darkness. Delaney wanted to believe everything was okay. Needed to believe it. She couldn't handle one more problem, one more threat to their fragile stability. She fell into an uneasy sleep, the detector's single warning lost in the fog of exhaustion and worry. In the nursery, Maple settled herself firmly between the vent and Tucker's crib, her vigilance unbroken even as the house grew quiet. The heater clicked on again, pushing warm air through the vents. Tucker coughed in his sleep, a small sound that echoed in the darkness. Maple's whine joined it, a duet of warnings going unheard in the night. In her dreams, Delaney heard them both. But reality had become too heavy, too overwhelming for her to distinguish true danger from the constant storm of fears that haunted her days. The cheap detector remained silent now, its weak battery unable to sustain even that single warning chirp. Outside, snow began to fall, insulating the small apartment like a blanket, sealing in both warmth and whatever invisible threat Maple sensed lurking in the vents. The night stretched on, carrying its secrets into the quiet hours before dawn. The morning light filtered weakly through the frost-covered windows as Delaney dialed the superintendent's number for the third time. Her fingers drummed nervously on the kitchen counter, while Tucker played with his blocks on a blanket nearby, Maple lying protectively at his side. Finally, Superintendent Lowell answered with a gruff, "Yeah?" "Mr. Lowell, this is Delaney Holt in apartment 3B, she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm concerned about our heating system. My carbon monoxide detector made a noise last night and—" "One of them cheap store detectors?" Lowell interrupted. "They're always going off for nothing. Probably needs new batteries." Delaney pressed on. "It's not just that. My dog keeps acting strange around the vents, especially when the heat comes on, and my baby's been coughing." "Look, Ms. Holt," Lowell cut in again, his tone dismissive. "We've got our annual inspection coming up next week. Everything's fine. That old furnace is as solid as they come." "But couldn't you just check it now? With all this cold weather—" "Listen," he said, impatience creeping into his voice. "I've got 15 other units calling about their heat. The inspection's already scheduled. Unless you're seeing smoke or flames, it'll have to wait." Delaney glanced at Tucker, who let out a small cough. "How long has it been since the last inspection?" A pause. "That's not really your concern, is it?" Lowell's voice had turned cold. "Like I said, everything's scheduled proper. Now, if you'll excuse me." The line went dead. Delaney stared at her phone, frustration and worry knotting in her stomach. Maple padded over and nudged her hand with a wet nose, as if sensing her distress. "What am I supposed to do, girl?" she whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "No one's listening." Her phone buzzed with an incoming email. Her heart sank as she recognized the sender, Brennan's lawyer. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "Ms. Holt, this office has been made aware of concerns regarding your living situation and potential safety hazards affecting the minor child. Any evidence of endangerment will be presented to strengthen Mr. Straub's petition for full custody. We strongly advise addressing these issues immediately. Regards, James Morton, Esquimosser. Delaney's legs felt weak. She sank into a kitchen chair, the threat of losing Tucker pressing down like a physical weight. Outside, fat snowflakes began drifting past the window, the sky heavy with the promise of more to come. Through the afternoon, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the city in white silence. Delaney paced the apartment, checking and rechecking the windows, the vents, the detector. Tucker grew fussy as the barometric pressure dropped, and even Maple seemed more agitated than usual. Around 4 o'clock, the power flickered. Delaney immediately gathered supplies: flashlights, extra blankets, Tucker's favorite stuffed elephant. The weather report warned of 6 to 8 inches by morning, with temperatures dropping into the teens. "Just what we need," she muttered, watching the snow pile up on the windowsill. More complications. As evening approached, the apartment grew colder despite the heating system's constant drone. Delaney dressed Tucker in his warmest sleeper, adding a light blanket for good measure. Maple stationed herself under the crib as usual, but her ears remained pricked, alert to every sound. Tucking Tucker in, Delaney couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy with more than just the approaching storm. Or was she imagining things? Was she letting Maple's behavior and her own fears create problems where none existed? She thought of the lawyer's email, of Sandra from CPS, of Superintendent Lowell's dismissive tone. Everyone seemed to think she was overreacting, being paranoid. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was seeing danger everywhere because she was so afraid of losing Tucker. But as she watched Maple's rigid posture beneath the crib, saw how the dog's eyes never left the heating vent, Delaney's mother's intuition screamed that this was different. This wasn't paranoia. This was protection. The same instinct that made her check Tucker's breathing in the middle of the night, that knew his different cries, that sensed when he was truly sick versus just tired. The snow fell harder now, visible in the cone of light from the street lamp outside. The wind picked up, whistling through the building's old bones. Tucker stirred in his sleep, letting out another of those worrying coughs. Maple whined softly in response. Delaney stood in the nursery doorway, exhaustion tugging at her limbs even as her mind raced. She should sleep while she could. Her shift at the diner started at 6 tomorrow morning. But the thought of closing her eyes filled her with nameless dread. The heater kicked on again, its familiar rumble now sinister in the gathering dark. Maple's head snapped up, nose working overtime as she sniffed the air near the vent. Tucker coughed again, a bit harder this time. "What do I do?" Delaney whispered to herself. "What's the right choice?" But there were no clear answers, only the soft sound of Tucker's breathing, Maple's quiet vigilance, and the storm's growing fury outside. Delaney hugged herself tightly, caught between trusting her instincts and fearing the consequences of either action or inaction. The snow continued to fall, transforming the world outside into something alien and white. Inside, the old heating system labored against the cold, pushing whatever invisible threat Maple sensed through the vents and into the small apartment where a mother stood guard, torn between her deepest instincts and her greatest fears. The snow had piled up to nearly 6 inches by the time Delaney's shift started at the Moonlight Diner. Her boots left deep impressions in the pristine white blanket as she hurried across the empty parking lot, the pre-dawn darkness making everything seem eerily quiet. Her neighbor Mrs. Chen had agreed to watch Tucker and Maple until noon, a kindness Delaney couldn't afford to refuse, despite her growing unease about leaving them. The diner's windows glowed warm and yellow against the darkness. Inside, the familiar scent of coffee and bacon wrapped around her like a comfort blanket. At least here, among the chrome and formica, she knew exactly what was expected of her. "Morning, sunshine," called Jerry from the kitchen. "Storm's keeping folks home. Might be a slow one." Delaney managed a tired smile as she tied her apron. "Fine by me. Could use a quiet day." The morning crawled by with only a handful of regulars braving the weather. Delaney was wiping down the counter for the third time when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up to see Nico Parrish stamping snow from his boots, his paramedic uniform wrinkled from what had clearly been a long shift. "Hey there," she said, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Rough night?" Nico settled onto his usual stool, running a hand through his dark hair. "Nothing too bad? Mostly helping people who shouldn't have been driving in this weather." He accepted the steaming mug with a grateful nod. "You look like you could use some coffee yourself. Everything okay?" Something in his gentle tone made Delaney's carefully maintained composure crack. Before she could stop herself, words began spilling out. About Maple's strange behavior, Tucker's coughing, the CPS visit, Brennan's threats, and the superintendent's dismissal of her concerns. "I know I probably sound crazy," she finished, twisting her dish towel. "Everyone keeps telling me I'm just being paranoid, but your gut says different," Nico finished, his expression thoughtful. "How long have you had Maple?" "Just a few weeks. Found her behind the diner during that first big snow." "And she's especially focused on your son's room? The heating vent?" Delaney nodded, relief flooding through her at having someone finally take her seriously. "She won't leave his crib. Keeps pawing at the blankets, whining at the vent. I've never seen a dog act like this." "Actually, I have." Nico set down his coffee cup. "Working dogs, especially search and rescue ones, they have this intense focus when they're on task. The way you describe Maple, it reminds me of the K9 units we sometimes work with." "Maple? But she's just a stray." "Maybe not. Did she have a collar when you found her?" "Yes, but it's old, all rusted. I couldn't make out anything on the tag." Nico's eyes lit up. "Do you have a picture?" Delaney pulled out her phone, scrolling through until she found a recent photo of Maple curled up beneath Tucker's crib. Her collar was barely visible in the dim light. "Mind if I stop by after my shift? I'd like to take a closer look at that collar." The offer caught her off guard. Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you." For the rest of her shift, Delaney found herself watching the clock. Nico's interest had sparked something in her. Not just hope that she wasn't imagining things, but a sense that there might be more to Maple's story than she'd realized. True to his word, Nico arrived at her apartment building just as she was getting home. Mrs. Chen had already left for her afternoon job, leaving Tucker napping peacefully while Maple maintained her vigilant post beneath the crib. "There's our girl," Nico said softly as they entered the nursery. Maple's tail thumped once in greeting, but she didn't move from her position. Nico crouched down beside her, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Hey there, beautiful. Mind if I take a look at your hardware?" To Delaney's surprise, Maple allowed him to gently examine her collar. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, angling it to catch the worn metal of the tag. "Look at this," he said after a moment. "See these marks? They're not just rust. There's something engraved here." Delaney knelt beside him, squinting at where his light illuminated faint letters on the tag's surface. "I can't quite make it out." Nico adjusted the angle slightly. "Wait, SAR. 17, I think. Wyoming Search and Rescue." The words hit Delaney like a physical blow. "Search and rescue? You mean—" "She's a trained professional." Nico scratched behind Maple's ears, Or was, anyway. SAR dogs are specially trained to find people in distress, detect environmental hazards, alert to danger. They're incredible animals. Delaney sank back on her heels, staring at Maple with new understanding. All this time, she hadn't just taken in a stray. She'd rescued a retired service dog. Those weren't random behaviors she'd been witnessing. They were trained responses to potential danger. But what happened to her handler? Why was she wandering around behind a diner? Nico's expression grew somber. Hard to say. Sometimes handlers retire or pass away, and the dogs have trouble adjusting. They can end up displaced, especially if family members can't care for them. He paused, studying Maple's focused posture. What matters is that she's here now, and she's trying to tell you something. You believe me then? About her warnings? I believe dogs like this don't raise false alarms. If Maple's concerned about that vent, there's a reason. He stood up, professional instincts taking over. Have you had the heating system checked? The superintendent says there's an inspection pending, but... Delaney trailed off, remembering his dismissive attitude. But nothing's been done, Nico finished. Listen, I know some people who might be able to help. Let me make a few calls. Relief and gratitude washed over her. For the first time in weeks, Delaney felt like she wasn't alone in this. She watched as Nico pulled out his phone, still absently petting Maple with his free hand. The dog's identity suddenly made everything clearer. Her careful attention to Tucker, her persistent warnings about the vent, her calm but determined presence. She wasn't just some random stray acting strangely. She was a trained professional doing exactly what she'd been taught to do. Protect and alert. Tucker stirred in his crib, making small snuffling sounds in his sleep. Maple's ears immediately pricked forward, her nose working as she tested the air. Delaney watched her with new respect, understanding now that every reaction, every warning came from years of specialized training. She had thought she was rescuing a dog that snowy night behind the diner. Instead, she might have found exactly the guardian her family needed, one whose instincts and training could be the key to keeping them safe from whatever invisible threat lurked in the vents of their small apartment. The revelation of Maple's true identity changed everything. She wasn't crazy for trusting the dog's warnings. She wasn't being paranoid. She had been right to listen to her instincts, just as Maple was following hers. The revelation about Maple's training kept turning over in Delaney's mind long after Nico left. She sat cross-legged on the floor near Tucker's crib, watching Maple's steady vigilance with new understanding. The afternoon light was fading, and the temperature outside had dropped enough that the heating system clicked on with a hollow groan. That's when she saw it. The pattern she'd been missing all along. As warm air seeped through the vent, Maple's head lifted sharply. Her amber eyes fixed not on Tucker's movements or sounds, but on his breathing. Delaney held perfectly still, watching as her son's tiny chest rose and fell, and then seemed to slow. The realization hit her like ice water. Maple wasn't reacting to Tucker's cries or movements. She was responding to changes in his breathing when the heater ran. "Oh, God," Delaney whispered, her hands trembling as she reached for Tucker. She lifted him from the crib, clutching him close as her mind raced through every instance of Maple's warnings. The dog's fixation on the vent, the way she pulled blankets away from Tucker's face, her increasing agitation whenever the heat came on. It all pointed to something seeping through those vents, something invisible but deadly. Panic surged through her veins. She couldn't stay here, couldn't risk another night with whatever poison was slowly filling their home. With shaking fingers, she dialed Mrs. Chen. "I need to leave for tonight," she explained hurriedly. "It's an emergency. Could you watch Tucker tomorrow while I figure things out?" Mrs. Chen's concerned voice crackled through the phone. Of course, dear. Is everything all right? I'll explain later. Thank you. Delaney ended the call and immediately began throwing essentials into a diaper bag. Formula, diapers, changes of clothes. Maple watched intently, her tail low but wagging slightly as if approving of their escape plan. The late winter sky had already darkened when Delaney hurried down to her car. Tucker bundled against her chest, and Maple following close behind. The snow had picked up again, adding to her sense of urgency. She drove carefully through the thickening storm until she spotted the neon vacancy sign of the Pine Ridge Motel. The room was small and dated, with faded floral wallpaper and a musty smell, but it was warm and, most importantly, safe. Delaney had just settled Tucker into a makeshift bed using spare blankets when a sharp knock at the door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a uniformed deputy and a familiar face that made her stomach drop. Gregory Walsh, Brennan's attorney. Maple let out a low growl. With trembling hands, Delaney opened the door. "How did you find me?" Walsh's smile was thin and predatory. "Mr. Straub was concerned when he learned you'd fled your apartment with his son. Given the existing custody situation, I'm sure you understand why that's problematic." "I didn't flee," Delaney protested. "I'm protecting my baby. There's something wrong with the heating system in my apartment. It's not safe." "Ma'am," the deputy cut in, "do you have any evidence of this alleged danger?" Delaney thought of the cheap detector that had chirped and died, of Maple's warnings that no one but Nico seemed to take seriously. "My dog. She's a former search and rescue animal. She's been alerting to something in the vents." Walsh's eyebrows rose. "The stray you took in? The one that prompted the CPS investigation in the first place?" "She's not just a stray," Delaney insisted. "She's trained to detect dangers. Please, I can't take Tucker back there until it's been properly inspected." "Actually," Walsh said, pulling out his phone, "I've already arranged for a certified inspector to examine your apartment first thing tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp." His tone hardened. "Until then, you have two choices. You can return to your apartment voluntarily, or I can file an emergency motion for temporary custody based on your erratic behavior and flight risk status. Your choice." Delaney felt the walls closing in. She looked at Tucker, peaceful in his blanket nest, then at Maple, who stood alert beside her. The thought of returning to the apartment terrified her, but losing Tucker to Brennan was unthinkable. "Fine," she whispered. "We'll go back, but I want it on record that I'm doing this under protest." "Noted," Walsh said smoothly. "The deputy will escort you home to ensure everyone's safety." The drive back felt like a funeral procession. Delaney's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white, while Maple sat rigidly in the back seat next to Tucker's car seat. The deputy's cruiser followed close behind, its headlights filling her rearview mirror. Back in the apartment, Delaney moved Tucker's portable bassinet into her bedroom, as far from the heating vent as possible. She opened her window a crack, ignoring the cold draft, and positioned Maple between the bassinet and the nearest vent. "Just one more night," she whispered, though whether she was reassuring herself, Tucker, or Maple, she wasn't sure. "We just have to make it through one more night." She sat on the edge of her bed, unable to sleep, watching Tucker's every breath. The heater clicked on, and Maple's head snapped up, her eyes fixed on the vent. Delaney's heart raced with each cycle of the heating system, wondering what invisible threat was seeping into their space, wondering if she'd made the right choice in coming back. The snow continued to fall outside her window, and somewhere in the building, the old furnace groaned on, pushing whatever danger lurked in its depths through the maze of vents and into their small corner of the world. Delaney pulled Tucker's bassinet even closer, her hand resting on its edge where she could feel his every movement. One more night. It felt like waiting for a bomb to go off. The temperature outside had dropped to well below freezing as midnight approached. Delaney sat propped against her bedroom wall, fighting to keep her eyes open. Tucker slept fitfully in his bassinet while Maple maintained her vigilant watch, her amber eyes fixed on the heating vent. A bitter wind rattled the window panes, making Delaney pull her sweater tighter around herself. The cold had become unbearable with the window cracked open, but she couldn't bring herself to close it completely. Her phone showed 12:15 in the morning, less than 8 hours until the inspector would arrive. The ancient furnace in the basement groaned to life, its machinery protesting against the frigid night. Almost immediately, Maple's ears pricked up. The dog rose from her position by the bassinet, hackles raised. "What is it, girl?" Delaney whispered, her heart beginning to race. The answer came in an explosion of movement. Maple burst into frenzied barking, louder than Delaney had ever heard her. The dog lunged at Tucker's bassinet, teeth catching the fabric of the crib bumper. She pulled hard, trying to drag the whole thing toward the bedroom door. "Maple, stop!" Delaney stumbled to her feet, but the room tilted strangely. Her vision swam, making it hard to focus. Was she just overtired? The thought felt sluggish, as if her brain was wrapped in cotton. Maple released the bumper and instead grabbed Tucker's blanket in her teeth, yanking it toward the door with desperate determination. The baby stirred, beginning to cry at the commotion. A shrill electronic screech pierced the air, the new carbon monoxide detector Delaney had bought to replace the cheap one. Her blood ran cold as understanding crashed through her mental fog. The apartment was filling with poison. The realization came with a wave of dizziness that sent her staggering against the wall. Her lips felt numb, and her limbs weren't responding properly. She tried to move toward Tucker, but her coordination was shot. The room spun violently. Maple abandoned the blanket and slammed into Delaney's legs, nearly knocking her over. The dog's shoulder pressed hard against her thighs, physically pushing her toward the door. When Delaney resisted, trying again to reach Tucker, Maple barked sharply and shoved harder. "Tucker!" Delaney gasped, her voice barely working. "I need... Tucker!" Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. The carbon monoxide detector continued its piercing warning, but it sounded farther away now, as if coming from underwater. Maple didn't hesitate. The moment Delaney slumped to the floor, the dog bounded to the bassinet. With incredible gentleness, she took hold of Tucker's sleeper with her teeth. The baby was fully crying now, but Maple maintained her careful grip as she dragged him towards the door. Delaney watched through rapidly blurring vision as her son slid past her into the hallway, guided by Maple's precise movements. She tried to call out, to move, to do anything, but her body wouldn't respond. The last thing she saw was Maple's golden fur, glowing like a beacon in the darkness that was swallowing her consciousness. The sound of running footsteps echoed down the hallway. Multiple voices shouted, but Delaney couldn't make out the words. Someone was touching her face, calling her name. She thought she recognized Nico's voice, but couldn't be sure. Everything was fading. Maple's urgent barking continued, leading help to where they were needed most. Even as Delaney slipped under, some part of her understood that the dog she'd rescued that snowy night behind the diner wasn't just returning the favor. She was fulfilling her deepest purpose, doing exactly what she'd been trained to do all along: save lives. The last thing Delaney felt was someone lifting her, carrying her away from the poisoned air. Maple's barks followed them down the hallway, a guardian's voice ensuring her charges would make it to safety. As consciousness slipped away entirely, Delaney's final thought was a prayer of gratitude for the mysterious forces that had brought this remarkable dog into their lives just when they needed her most. Sometimes, she realized, angels wore fur instead of wings. The cold hit Delaney's face like needles as Maple dragged Tucker across the snow-dusted walkway outside their apartment building. Her own consciousness flickered in and out, the world tilting and spinning around her as she tried to crawl after them. The bitter winter air helped clear her head slightly, but her limbs still felt like lead weights. Through blurred vision, she saw headlights cutting through the darkness. A truck screeched to a halt, and running footsteps crunched in the snow. Nico's familiar voice called out in alarm. "Delaney! Oh God! Tucker!" She tried to speak but could only manage a weak moan. Nico's strong hands were suddenly on her shoulders, checking her pulse. His EMT training kicked in as he assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. "Stay with me, Delaney," he urged, his voice steady despite the worry in his eyes. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, counting silently. "Can you hear me? Try to take deep breaths." Maple barked sharply, still holding Tucker's sleeper in her gentle grip. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers, concerning Nico even more. He pulled out his phone while keeping one hand on Delaney's shoulder. "This is EMT Parrish. I need emergency response at 215 Oak Street Apartments. Possible carbon monoxide poisoning, 2 victims, adult female and infant. Send fire rescue and additional ambulance units immediately." The world swam in and out of focus as Delaney fought to stay conscious. She could hear Nico speaking into his radio, calling for backup, but his words seemed to come from very far away. Her only clear thought was for Tucker. "My baby," she managed to whisper. "Please." "I've got him," Nico assured her, already moving to where Maple had dragged Tucker. He scooped up the infant, checking his vital signs with practiced movements. "He's breathing. Maple got him out in time." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Red and blue lights began to paint the snow in alternating colors. Delaney tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. The frigid ground beneath her seemed to be trying to pull her under. More vehicles arrived, their tires crunching on the frozen parking lot. Firefighters in heavy gear jumped out, tanks clanking. Someone wrapped a blanket around Delaney's shoulders, while another first responder took Tucker from Nico's arms to check him over. Carbon monoxide detector went off, Delaney forced out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maple, she knew." "The dog saved their lives," Nico explained to the firefighter captain as he helped lift Delaney onto a waiting gurney. "She's a former search and rescue K9. Got them both out before they lost consciousness." The firefighters were already entering the building, masks in place. Their powerful flashlights swept the darkened hallways as they checked for other residents who might be at risk. The captain barked orders into his radio, coordinating the emergency response. "Building evacuation in progress. We need gas company representatives on site immediately. Possible furnace malfunction." Through the chaos, Delaney kept her eyes fixed on Tucker. The paramedics had wrapped him in a silver emergency blanket and were giving him oxygen through a tiny mask. His cries had strengthened, which they assured her was a good sign. "Oxygen saturation is improving," one EMT reported. "Let's get them both to the hospital for observation." Maple stood guard nearby, her tail low but her posture alert as she watched the activity around her charges. Several first responders paused to pat her head or offer quiet words of praise. She accepted their attention graciously, but refused to move far from Delaney and Tucker. A young firefighter emerged from the building carrying Maple's blanket from inside. He draped it carefully around her shoulders, scratching behind her ears. "Good girl," he said softly. "You're a real hero tonight." Delaney reached out weakly from her gurney, and Maple came to press her nose into her palm. The dog's fur was dusted with snow, but her eyes were bright and watchful. In them, Delaney saw the same steady dedication that had drawn her to the shivering stray behind the diner all those weeks ago. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, Maple, thank you." The scene continued to unfold around them like a surreal dream. More residents emerged from the building, some confused, others frightened. The firefighters' investigation confirmed what Maple had been trying to tell them all along. A crack in the aging furnace had been leaking carbon monoxide into the ventilation system. "The levels in your apartment were dangerously high," the fire captain explained to Delaney as the paramedics prepared to transport her. "If that dog hadn't gotten you both out when she did?" He shook his head, leaving the grim possibility unspoken. Nico appeared beside her gurney, his face etched with concern. "I'm following right behind the ambulance," he promised. "Maple can ride with me." Relief and horror crashed over Delaney in waves as the full reality of what they'd escaped began to sink in. All those nights of Maple's strange behavior, the whining, the pawing at Tucker's blankets, the fixation on the heating vent. She'd been trying to warn them, using every instinct from her search and rescue training to protect her new family. The paramedics began loading the gurney into the ambulance. Delaney kept her eyes locked on Tucker in the second emergency vehicle, then shifted her gaze to Maple climbing into Nico's truck. The dog who had wandered into her life as a shivering stray had turned out to be their guardian angel, saving them from a danger they couldn't even see. As the ambulance doors closed and they pulled away from the apartment building, Delaney caught one last glimpse of the scene through the rear windows. Emergency lights still painted the snow in shifting colors, and firefighters continued their work securing the building. The night that could have ended in tragedy had instead become a testament to one dog's unwavering loyalty and courage. The steady beep of the heart monitor and the hiss of oxygen filled the ambulance as they sped toward the hospital. Delaney's head was starting to clear in the fresh air, but her thoughts kept returning to Maple's desperate attempts to warn them. Sometimes, she realized, love and protection came in unexpected forms. And sometimes the most powerful angels were the ones who walked beside us on four legs, their hearts full of nothing but devotion and the drive to serve. The fluorescent lights of Cheyenne Regional Medical Center cast harsh shadows across the pediatric ward's pale green walls. Delaney sat in an uncomfortable chair beside Tucker's hospital crib, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. The oxygen mask had been replaced with a smaller nasal cannula, and his color had improved significantly over the past few hours. A kind-faced nurse named Rita checked Tucker's vital signs, smiling as she recorded the numbers. "His oxygen levels are almost back to normal," she said softly. "He's responding beautifully to treatment. Babies are remarkably resilient." Delaney reached through the crib rails to stroke Tucker's cheek. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the pale wisps of his hair. Her own head still ached, but she refused to leave his side. The doctors had insisted she receive oxygen therapy too, so they'd brought a portable unit to her chair. "You're doing great, sweet boy," she whispered. The terror of the night before still gripped her heart. The dizziness, Maple's frantic barking, the moment she realized they were being poisoned. If it hadn't been for that dog... The sharp click of expensive shoes on linoleum interrupted her thoughts. Brennan Straub appeared in the doorway, his tailored suit incongruous among the cheerful animal paintings and medical equipment. His face wore an expression of calculated concern. "I came as soon as I heard," he announced, loud enough for the nursing staff to hear. "How could you let this happen, Delaney?" She stiffened in her chair. "Let this happen? A gas leak? In that decrepit building?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I told you that place wasn't fit for a child. And now look, our son could have died because of your stubbornness." The nurse, Rita, shot him a disapproving look as she adjusted Tucker's IV line. "Sir, your son is recovering well. He's very fortunate that their dog alerted them to the danger." "The stray?" Brennan scoffed. "The one she let sleep in his room? Another sterling example of her judgment?" Delaney's hands trembled with anger. "Maple saved his life. She's a trained search and rescue dog, and she knew something was wrong long before any of us did." "Which is exactly my point." Brennan pulled a folder from his briefcase. "If you'd been a more attentive mother, you wouldn't have needed a dog to tell you your baby was in danger. My lawyer filed an emergency petition this morning. We're seeking immediate temporary custody." The oxygen tubing slipped from Delaney's nose as she stood up. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious." He placed the papers on Tucker's bedside table. "This incident proves what I've been saying all along. You're not equipped to provide a safe environment for our child." Before Delaney could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. 2 men in fire marshal uniforms appeared, accompanied by a police officer and a nervous-looking Superintendent Lowell. "Mr. Straub?" The older fire marshal stepped forward. "I'm Chief Inspector Wilson. We need to discuss the inspection history of your property on Pine Street." Brennan's politician's smile faltered slightly. "I'm here visiting my son. Surely this can wait." "No, sir, it can't." The inspector consulted his notebook. "We've discovered multiple code violations in the building's heating system, including unauthorized repairs and falsified inspection records. Mr. Lowell here has some very interesting things to say about who ordered him to avoid proper maintenance procedures." The superintendent wouldn't meet Brennan's eyes. He twisted his worn cap in his hands, his face flushed with shame and fear. "I'm sorry, Mr. Straub. I can't lie to them. Not after what almost happened to that baby." "What is he talking about?" Delaney demanded. The police officer stepped forward. "Mr. Lowell has provided a sworn statement. Apparently, Mr. Straub instructed him to perform temporary repairs on the furnace, rather than replace it, specifically to avoid raising red flags during the building's pending sale." Brennan's composed facade cracked. "That's ridiculous. I would never—" "We have the text messages, sir," the officer interrupted. "And the maintenance logs. Mr. Lowell documented everything." The superintendent's voice was barely above a whisper. "You said to keep things quiet, to avoid inspection panic that might scare off buyers. But I never thought— That furnace was ancient. The crack in the heat exchanger—" He shook his head. "I should have reported it properly." Delaney sank back into her chair, stunned by the revelation. All those weeks of Maple's warnings, her own growing unease, while Brennan had knowingly left them in danger to protect his business interests. The fire marshal turned to Delaney. "Ma'am, we'll need a formal statement from you about the dog's behavior leading up to last night. Those documented warnings could be crucial evidence." "Evidence?" Brennan's voice rose. "Evidence of what?" "Criminal negligence, for starters," the officer replied. "Possibly reckless endangerment. The district attorney will make the final determination." Rita the nurse had positioned herself protectively near Tucker's crib. "I think that's enough excitement for now. This little one needs his rest." She looked pointedly at Brennan. "Sir, I'll have to ask you to step out." Brennan's face had gone pale. He glanced from the officers to Delaney, then to the custody papers still sitting on the table. Without another word, he turned and strode from the room, his expensive shoes clicking rapidly down the hall. The superintendent lingered, his weathered face creased with remorse. "I'm so sorry, Miss Holt. I should have listened when you reported those problems. Your dog, she knew. She was trying to tell us all along." Delaney nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The fire marshal patted her shoulder gently. "We'll need your statement when you're feeling stronger. For now, focus on your little boy. He's safe now. That's what matters most." As the officials filed out, Rita adjusted Tucker's blanket and checked his monitors one more time. "Your son is doing wonderfully," she assured Delaney. "And from what I hear, you've got quite a special dog waiting to see you both." "Maple," Delaney whispered, tears filling her eyes. "She's been at the emergency vet since last night, getting checked for carbon monoxide exposure too." "Well, as soon as the doctors clear you both, I'd say that brave girl deserves the biggest hug in the world." Rita smiled warmly. "Sometimes our guardian angels have fur and 4 legs." Delaney reached for Tucker's tiny hand, marveling at its perfect warmth. The morning sun painted patterns on his hospital blanket as his chest rose and fell in peaceful sleep. Outside the window, fresh snow was falling, covering the city in a clean white blanket, nature's way of washing away the darkness of the night before. Her mind wandered to Brennan's hasty exit, his cruel accusations transformed into evidence of his own negligence. The truth was finally emerging, like the first rays of dawn after the longest night. And at the center of it all was a loyal dog who had wandered into her life just when they needed her most. The steady beep of Tucker's heart monitor filled the quiet room, a reminder that they had survived, not just the poison in their home, but the toxic influence of those who had tried to tear them apart. As Tucker slept peacefully in his hospital crib, Delaney felt something new taking root in her heart. Not just relief or gratitude, but a growing certainty that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as challenges, and that love, in all its forms, was the strongest force of all. In the days following the incident, Nico became Delaney's steadfast ally in building her case. He arrived at the hospital during his off hours, laptop in hand, ready to help piece together the evidence that would tell her story. "Look, what I found," he said one afternoon, pulling up an old database entry. "Wyoming search and rescue records from 2017. There's Maple's full certification." He turned the screen toward Delaney, showing a younger version of their hero dog, standing proud beside her original handler. Delaney leaned forward, studying the document. "Can we get an official copy?" "Already requested it." Nico smiled. The fire department report came in too. They documented everything: the cracked heat exchanger, the faulty repairs, even the carbon monoxide readings from that night. Together, they created a timeline. Delaney pulled up her phone, scrolling through weeks of detailed notes about Maple's behavior. "The timestamps match perfectly with when the furnace would kick on," she explained. "She knew something was wrong every single time." The Child Protective Services footage proved particularly powerful. The investigator's body camera had captured the cheep detector chirping its warning during their visit, a critical detail that now supported Delaney's vigilance rather than condemning her choices. "You didn't ignore the signs," Nico said quietly. "You fought to protect Tucker every step of the way." Local news stations began calling, eager to feature Maple's story. But Delaney declined most interviews, focusing instead on documenting every detail that proved her fitness as a mother. She organized medical records showing Tucker's perfect health checkups, her steady employment history, and character references from regular customers at the diner who had watched her work double shifts to provide for her son. What had started as a desperate defense transformed into something stronger, a mother's testament to love, instinct, and unwavering dedication. With each piece of evidence carefully preserved, Delaney wasn't just fighting accusations anymore. She was reclaiming her truth, her strength, and her right to be called exactly what she had always been: a good mother. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as Delaney sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Maple lay quietly at her feet, her presence a steady comfort in the tense atmosphere. Across the aisle, Brennan's expensive legal team shuffled papers with confident smirks. "Your Honor," Brennan's lead attorney began, his voice dripping with condescension. "The respondent's case relies heavily on what amounts to folklore about a supposed miracle dog. We shouldn't waste the court's time with fairy tales about animal instincts." Delaney's attorney rose slowly. "If I may, Your Honor, we have evidence that's far more concrete than folklore." She nodded to her assistant, who dimmed the lights and started the video footage. The courtroom fell silent as the security camera recording played on the large screen. The black and white footage showed Maple's desperate attempts to wake Tucker, her determined efforts to block the heating vent, and finally, her heroic rescue of both mother and child. The timestamps clearly matched the furnace activation records. Furthermore, Delaney's attorney continued, producing a certified document. "We have Maple's complete Wyoming search and rescue service record. This dog was professionally trained to detect human distress. Her actions that night weren't random. They were the result of years of specialized training." The fire marshal's report came next, detailing the lethal carbon monoxide levels and the criminally negligent repairs. As each piece of evidence mounted, Brennan's composed facade began to crack. The judge leaned forward, studying the documents with intense focus. "These readings," she said, tapping the fire marshal's report, "indicate that without the dog's intervention, the child would not have survived the night." Brennan's attorneys shuffled uncomfortably as their case crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. The courtroom remained absolutely still, the truth of how close Tucker had come to death hanging heavy in the air. The judge's gavel cracked through the silence. Her stern gaze swept across the courtroom, settling on Brennan with unmistakable disapproval. "Mr. Straub," she began, her voice sharp with authority, "this court finds your actions not only deplorable but calculated. You attempted to weaponize the legal system against a mother who was, in fact, protecting her child. The evidence shows you actively discouraged proper maintenance inspections during a property sale, putting countless lives at risk." Brennan's polished facade finally shattered. He stared at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes as the judge continued. "Your petition for custody is denied with prejudice. This means you cannot refile on these grounds." The judge shuffled her papers, then addressed the wider courtroom. "Furthermore, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation of the building owner and Superintendent for Criminal Endangerment." Delaney felt tears well up in her eyes as the Child Protective Services representative approached with official documents. "We're closing your case, Ms. Holt," she said softly. "Your quick thinking and Maple's intervention saved your son's life. That's the opposite of negligence." For the first time in months, Delaney's shoulders relaxed. She stood straight and tall, one hand resting on Maple's head. The exhaustion of the long battle still showed in the shadows under her eyes, but something else shone through. Pride, relief, and most importantly, freedom. The courtroom began to clear. As Brennan hurried past, he couldn't meet her gaze. Delaney watched him go, feeling not triumph, but a quiet certainty that she had done right by her son. Maple pressed against her leg, tail wagging gently, as if to say she had known all along that truth would win out. The autumn sun streamed through wide windows, casting warm patches across the hardwood floors of Delaney's new apartment. 6 weeks had passed since the courthouse victory, and life had settled into a gentle rhythm above Morton's Books and Brew, owned by Nico's sister Sarah. The space felt different from her old apartment, safer, warmer, filled with possibility. Maple dozed beneath Tucker's crib, her new service animal certification tags gleaming on her collar. The golden retriever's presence was now official, though Delaney knew she had always been their guardian angel. A brand new carbon monoxide detector glowed steadily green on the wall, its digital display showing safe readings. It was one of 3 in the apartment, a precaution that brought peace rather than anxiety. Delaney stood in the nursery doorway, watching Tucker's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep. Her baby boy had grown so much in these few months, his cheeks rosier, his smile bigger. Gratitude washed over her, softening the tired lines around her eyes that were slowly fading. A gentle knock at the door made her smile. Nico stood there, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee from the bookstore cafe downstairs. His presence had become a comfortable constant, much like Maple's, steady, reliable, and warm. "Thought you might need this," he whispered, mindful of Tucker's nap time. For the first time in what felt like forever, Delaney let herself return his smile fully. She felt it in her heart. This was safety. This was peace. This was a home built on trust that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Taking the coffee, she let her fingers brush against his, no longer afraid to accept the good things life offered. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.